everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. It's crazy busy around here with the Fall Festival, so I hope that you all are coming and joining us for the Fall Festival and all the festivities that we have, all the keynote speakers. So make sure that you're signed up and registered and you're joining us for that. And then welcome to Tuesdays with Grace. I'm really excited about today, and we're going to talk about future segments and what I feel like I've been kind of missing something to connect with you with your projects and with quilting, and so I apologize about that, but we're going to jump in and go through the pre-quilting checklist. And this is just getting your frame and your machines ready to quilt. Now, I've decided that there's another checklist that we need to go through, and it's preparing to your designs and what you want to quilt on your quilt. So we're going to continue this on, leading into future segments and going through my quilting journey. And I'm going to show you the quilt that I'm going to do this on later on in the program. But let's jump in and get started with our pre-quilting checklist. And by the way, welcome everybody. I so appreciate you joining me today, and hope that you can glean and learn, and that we can share our experiences, our tips, our techniques with each other, because that's what this platform is all about, is connecting to what the tools and our passions and our giving hearts to everybody that we love and appreciate. So let's jump in and let's talk about my pre-quilting checklist. Now, it has kind of changed a little bit over time as I've really thought about what it takes to get ready to quilt a quilt, okay? And there's so many steps to preparing, because I feel like that's one of our biggest fears, is what do I quilt and how do I quilt it? Yeah, preparing our frames and our machines, one step of it, and really an important step, but it's the how-to part that we're going to jump in and we're going to dissect and learn from each other. So let's jump in and talk about number one, is gather up all of our materials. I don't know if you realize how important this is to gather all your materials. Hi. We have so many cameras around here, I don't know which one to look at. So hi there. All right, so gather up all your materials. It's really important because, like I've said before, once you're in that groove and in that mood to be quilting, it takes a little bit of courage every time you go to quilt. I don't know if you have anxieties, but I do every time I quilt. So make sure that you gather up all your materials, gather up your needles, extra needles that you need. Have an extra bobbin case on hand, really key and important. Get your tools selected and what you're going to need, your height adjustment. If you're going to tool, if you're going to change the foot, get your accessory feet that you're going to be using. So say you're going to be using the couching foot, but not throughout all the quilt. You're going to need these tools to make it flow smoother. So, I always try to put them on, this is a good landing spot for some of these tools so they know where they are at. And then also your bobbins and everything. So I will put them on the bottom carriage right here, so I know that they're easily accessible and I can just reach under and grab them as I'm ready. So that's where I'll put them as I'm quilting. Make sure you have your ruler base on correctly and nice and steady. But just think about the tools and the items that you'll need for your quilt, and gather them up and have them ready and available. And even if you're using different colors of threads, make sure that those, and if you are using different threads, make sure you have both sizes of the needles ready. So gather up all your materials, and now the next one is so important. I don't know if you realize how important this one is too, is clean and dust your tracks. Your tracks fill up with dust and debris from while you're quilting. As your machine's moving back and forth, it's going across, your needle's going up and down, little fibers from the fabric are falling down on it, and if you've ever unpicked a whole section of your quilt, man, those are all over the place. So make sure you're dusting and wiping up there. Now, I don't want you to use Clorox wipes or something like that because they leave a sticky residue. And that sticky residue will actually attract more dust and debris as you're quilting. So make sure it's just water. You could probably use vinegar water because it's very clean and very toxin free. And so, yeah, just make sure it's a damp cloth. Right now, I don't have a damp cloth. I'm just using a paper towel. Now, this paper towel doesn't have a lot of loose fibers. Maybe a Kleenex might. Just watch it. If you have a microfiber cloth, that is great. Make sure you're washing it before you use it again because the dust will just fall and collect. So we're going to go through and dust off our wheels and our tracks, okay? So just make sure you're wiping the tracks on it. And as you're wiping, just kind of feel. And notice, I just wiped that little section of track, and look how dirty it was. And that's the dirt and the debris that's going to build up on your wheels. And as your wheels build up, if you're free motion quilting, if you've ever felt it be uneven, there's threads and fibers that can be caught around your wheels. So make sure that you're checking your wheels too. Do your carriage tracks on both sides, just wipe them off. And look at that. Now, I'm going to go around to the back, but I'm going to go this way so you can see my big fat head, okay? So right here, we've got our wheels, and these wheels are pretty clean, but if you look down underneath, we have several sets of wheels, and they're dual wheels on this, so make sure that you're wiping it up. And sometimes I will just put my cloth right behind the wheel, or right here, and just move the wheel right along there and let it right along my cloth. Okay, and there wasn't that much because I have cleaned this off earlier. I shouldn't have done that, but I can find really some dirty carriages. And notice right here, there's some little specks. So I'm just gonna let it right along my cloth. You wanna do every wheel. See that wheel right there? Filthy, because that's from that wheel. Now, this dust and the debris will settle down on your tracks. And if you think about it, as you're moving back and forth, if you don't clean your wheels, that dust is going to be ground down into your tracks. And it's going to break up your tracks and not make them last as long as you want them to. So this is really important. It's like rotating your tires. Okay. It's like rotating your tires on your car. You want an even wear on them. And so as you're driving down the road, you're going over bumps and stuff like that, you rotate the tires and then have them, I don't know, what is it called, level them out so that they're riding correctly. That's what you're doing for this, okay? And make sure that on your frame and your machine that you just wipe it down really good. Get all that dust because it gets so dusty. Okay, let's talk about the next one, okay? And I could spend all day cleaning these because it gets pretty filthy out here. At the Grace Company, we used to do wood, and you can imagine that dust is still kind of around from wood. So let's go to the next one. Now that I've talked about that and how important it is checking our machine cords. Making sure that your cords are plugged in correctly. I don't know if you have little gremlins at your house, but around here, we are moving machines from one section to the other. So checking the cords out and checking to see if the machine is sewing correctly is really key. So if you're going to go back, let's start checking the cords back here. Let's make sure that it's plugged in back here and it's plugged in correctly. Make sure that your retaining wire is holding the cord, the machine power cord in. And then make sure that your encoders are plugged in correctly into the correct ports. Earlier today, I was plugging them in and I almost plugged in the encoder port into the quilt motion port. So make sure that you're plugging them into the correct ports, and also that you have the cords plugged in and mounted in correctly into the right ports for the automation and everything. So make sure you're checking your cords and everything is plugged in and that your machine turns on, and that your cords are not catching as you are moving along your tracks and along your quilt. the further distance that you go, the harder it is to make sure that you need to make sure that all the way across. Now, we like to use our frames. We like to use our frames as storage. So I have a lot of things packed underneath my frame at home. And so if you have boxes or bins of fabric like I do, make sure that they're tucked in so that as your cord is moving along its little journey down the path of the frame, that it's not catching on one of those and messes up your beautiful design. So make sure that your machine, you can pull it forward or push it back and move it side to side. Okay, so make sure that there's clearance. So I just do the little test because I forget that I use my shelf, my table as storage, or I'll put templates or something like that. It just kind of gets cluttered. I know you guys are probably more organized than I am, and kudos to you. I have a question from Barbara. She says, do you take off the faceplate and clean like you do on a domestic machine? Yes, I do. I don't do it as often, just like on my domestic machine. I probably do it 3, maybe 4 times a year. I'll clean it out really, really good. And so really key and very important. And then if you have threads caught down under there, you can pull them out. It doesn't need to happen as often as you're cleaning your wheels and everything, but it does need to happen, just like with your domestic machine. Great question, and I'm glad you asked. Any other questions? Let me know. All right, so make sure that you're checking your cords and checking the mobility of the machine, and that's very key. All right, so now let's talk about oiling the machine. Okay, the hook assembly is the most important part of the machine. If you are not oiling your hook assembly on your domestic machine, it is starving or thirsty for that oil. So make sure you oil it. Any of your machines, if you have not oiled them, man, it's time. So let's talk about, this is the part where you'll take your bobbin case out, right here. Sorry, I'm gonna reach down here. Okay, take your bobbin case out, and notice I had already sewed to test it, but I'm just gonna cut it off, okay. And notice that dust and everything, make sure you're cleaning that out as well. See that dust that's right down in there? You can see that it fills up. Notice I have a little hairball, a little dust ball right there. That's from all that wonderful quilting that we've been doing here at the Grace Company. Now, granted, if I was probably at home, I would put it in my garbage can. Make sure you have a garbage can close. Or I have a little pile right here on the corner of my quilt that I always put my loose threads so that I can gather them up. So have a little spot where you can put it, and that's where that's going to go till I have a garbage can, because it's not fair for the vacuum to pick it up. My husband will tell you that. He hates that. So as I've pulled it out, we want to make sure that we're oiling our hook assembly. Now the hook is the part of the machine that's going back and forth making those knots for your stitch. So it's working back and forth, up and down, and it's the part that you really need to oil. And so what you'll do is you'll just take your oil and just kind of oil all the way around, okay, up here, and I kind of like to put it right, a little drop right up here, and I'm not going to sew with it yet. Okay, just a drop. You don't need more than that. And then I'm going to go in the back, and I'm just going to turn my hand wheel. And notice on these hand wheels, there's a little arrow telling you the direction that needs to be turned, and it's this direction right here, and towards the right, and you're just going to move it up and down several times to work that oil in. And just keep moving it up and down, because we want to work that oil in. And I promise you, if you will oil it, it will sound like a different machine. And I do this every quilt. Every quilt, I will oil it regularly. Even my domestic machines, when I'm piecing, sometimes if it's taking me longer, I will oil it in the middle of the quilt, because you can kind of hear it kind of dries up and it needs it. Now, some of the other parts that you need to oil, you don't need to oil as often. So read your manual. If you don't have a Grace machine, just make sure you're reading your manual and you're following the instructions. But the hook assembly needs to be oiled more often than any other part of the machine. So make sure you're doing that. All right. Next, we're going to talk about clean and thread your machine and the thread guides. Okay, so make sure as I'm threading, I will always tug on the threads as it's going through each of these parts of the, each of these thread guides are what they're called. And I like to feel for burrs. If there's a little catch as you're moving through the process, it might have a little burr. And after a while, it kind of, the thread wears through it, and it can wear through the metal and stuff. On my domestic machine at home, I have a piece of thread that comes down here from the arm, and it comes right down here, and it goes to the needle. It has, because I've used it so much, it has a little worn spot that the thread catches in. So now I can't use that part of it, so I have to pull. I did a little wire piece so I could hold it outside of that. It's probably time to give it a rest. But anyway, I love that machine, but I can just keep it going because I put it outside the wire and it just pulls it away from that little groove that I've made. So make sure that you're pulling and threading. And I start from the back of the machine. So right here, it's easier for me on the longer arm machines to start from the back as I'm threading. So let me show you. Let me get my scissors here and let me just cut. All right, so I'm going to start threading from the back. Now threading it and threading it correctly are really important. Get your glasses on, number one. If you need the glasses so you can see, make sure you're getting it. So I'll start back here. And even on the shorter arm machines, that 16 over there, it doesn't have this post. But it's important to make sure that you're getting your threads in the thread guides correctly. So I will go from the back, and I'll put it through the hole. Oops, sorry, I pulled it out. Pull it from the back, put it through the hole, and grab it, and then I'm going to bring it back around to this side. Now, usually these are threaded the same, so whether you have arm machines or not, that's really basically how it's threaded. So now this thread guide is aligning with this thread guide right here. So it's going to put it in the correct position. So now I'm just going to put it through, and I know I have the automation on there because that was another part. So now I'm going to pull it through here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm holding it with both hands. And see these discs right here? I'm holding it with this hand, but I'm going to pull it between the disc and down, and I'm going to feel it as it's pulling down in there, and now I know it's securely pulled in and flushed between those discs. Next, I'm going to put it through this bottom thread guide here, and this one is lining it up to make sure that it's going to work correctly or aligned with my tension knob. Now, I'm going to do the same thing. Notice how I have this held? I'm holding it with both hands. This is going to ensure that you're pulling it between the tension disc. Very key as we're threading, because if it's just sitting there on the back of the disc and not pulled between them, it's not going to give you any tension. And you're going to see that you're going to have loose quilting on top and on bottom. So make sure that you're holding it like this. You're going to pull it with this finger and these fingers right here towards the back, and you're going to floss it towards you between the disc. Bring this hand up and over the spring and down below. All right, and now we're just going to go to this little arm here and thread it there. All right, there we go. And I can tell as I'm pulling on this thread, pulling it down towards and threading it, that there's tension on it. So that's another thing. Just make sure that you're feeling the tension. No, not in the room. I don't want there to be much tension in the room. But there needs to be a little tension on your thread. You don't need any more tension, but the thread does. And this is where I can see that there's a little oil buildup right there. And we're going to sew it off after we get it threaded. But we're going to talk about the bobbin and the needle. Now, before I thread the needle, let's talk about changing the needle and getting a new one. Oh, God, so important. As you are sewing or as you are quilting, your needle, the tip of it is wearing down. And as it wears down, it's going to poke holes into your quilt or your fabric. So make sure that you are changing your needles. Now, if you need to know what size needle you need to use, look at your threads. Your threads will be your guide. The threads will say, usually it will tell you what weights are good and what size needle that you need to use. Now, if you're looking for that, there's a great resource in our manuals, if you have our machines, that gives you a little guide for what needles to use and what thread types. So if you need that, let me know. You can always email me and I can get you some information. So it's Carla with a K, K-A-R-L-A @graceframe.com. Want to hear from you, want to give you the tools that you need. All right, so now that we've gotten there, let's talk about changing our needle. And I didn't know if I was going to change the needle, but I thought, hey, I've even screwed up on changing the needle as well. So I felt like it was really important for you to see what I do to change the needle. So I always have my flathead screwdriver ready and available, because if you are quilting a quilt that has lots of seams, you're going to have to change your needle more often. So just loosen. And it's just a thumb screw, but since I broke my wrist, man, it's gimpy and it's harder to use. So I'm going to just take this needle out, okay? And just throw it out so you don't use it again, okay? It looks okay, but I'm sure as it's been quilting, it's losing its tip and its sharpness. So I'm going to grab one, and we use the MR needles now. We found that they are a better needle for how the thread glides along the back of it. Now there are two sides of the needle. There's the front side that's kind of a little more flat, and the back side is the side where it has the scarf or the groove. So if you will position your needle in your fingers so that that groove is facing towards the back of your machine, then you will put it up in that slot. And we're not really going to adjust it just yet. So I like to use my finger. But a little tip that the Sewing Lab showed me was, cute little Allie in the Sewing Lab, I saw her changing the needle, and she had this little piece of paper that she put back behind it. And notice, look at that. I don't even have the needle in straight or your magnet tool. So just make sure you're using the right tools and aligning it straight. So see how it's kind of off to one side? It's off towards my left side right here that I'm facing the front. I'm just going to loosen it just a little and keep turning it. And sometimes I'll like to put my finger back here so that I can align the hole. And if you need to, make sure you're using your glasses. Okay. So I think that's pretty good. But we'll know soon enough. If I start quilting and it starts breaking, well, we'll know Carla needs to check her needle. So anyway, I'm going to thread my needle, and that's also going to help me make sure that it's lined up nice and straight. So as I'm threading my needle, it's looking like the hole is okay. And where did those scissors go? All right, I brought 2 pairs of scissors because I always am losing scissors, so make sure you have plenty of scissors on hand. That's my other tip for you. Or use the little guide. Come on, Carly, you can do this. Good grief. I probably need my glasses today. There she goes. She can do it. Okay, so now as I'm looking at it, it looks pretty good. So it looks pretty straight. All right, let's talk about, I took the bobbin case out, which was good because I oiled it, okay? So let's talk about putting your bobbin cases in. Now, I like to use pre-wound bobbins when I can, all right? But some of them can be overfilled. So if you're using a pre-wound bobbin, take some off, because they just kind of overfill them, and that first little bit of quilting, it will catch, and it will catch in your bobbin. So I'm just going to take a little bit off and make sure that it right here, I can just get a little bit of clearance in there, and it's not all the way to the edge of the bobbin. As you're winding bobbins, if you're like me, I really like to wind as much as I can, but I have learned that if you overfill the bobbins, it's not good, and it will cause some bad stitches. So make sure that you just take a little bit of, I don't care who's pre-wound. This isn't just what I'm saying for ours. It's across the board. If you're using pre-wound bobbins, take a little bit off, okay? And some of you don't like pre-wounds, that's fine. Use what you like to use. But if you're winding your bobbins, don't over-wind them either. Make sure that they're winding correctly. Make sure that they're tight, and that you can't get your fingernail in there. You want them nice and tight so that as it pulls off, your tension is correct. If you have a loose bobbin from winding it up, then it's going to cause tension in your sewing machine as you're quilting. So make sure that if it's really loose and you can get your fingernail down in there and it just kind of feels kind of squishy, make sure that you tighten up the disc on your bobbin winder, and that way it will give it more tension as you're winding it up, okay? Also make sure that it's winding nice and even. So it's going from the top and back down to the top, up and down. If it's not and it's filling up kind of like a tornado is the look that you'll get. It's fatter at the top and thinner at the bottom, or vice versa. Then you need to make some adjustments to your bobbin winder. Check your manual for that, and it should show you how to make those adjustments to adjust the bobbin winder so that it is winding correctly. Okay, Robin, she has a great question. How many quilts do you do before changing the needle? I do one. I even change the needle in the middle of the quilt. Okay, it's kind of subjective, okay? If you have a quilt that has lots of seams, then it's going to be harder for the needle to go down through those seams, okay? Even if you've ironed them open, you need to just change the needle. If you start to hear it ping, a little pinging, that it's having a little harder time getting through the fabric, then change your needle. Now batiks and different fabrics are more tightly woven than say a cotton that's a little looser and it has an easier time getting through the fibers. So if it's a little tighter and it has a little sheen over it, then make sure you're changing a little more often, because your needle is having to work a little extra harder to get down through the fabric. So just kind of listen and watch, and then if something in your mind says maybe it's time to change the needle, don't try and push it, change it, okay? Because every time I don't listen to that little subconscious voice inside my head, it gets me in trouble. And I don't know if it gets you in trouble as well, but it does. So listen to that little voice. It's that little quilter, inner quilter voice telling you, giving you some good tips. Okay, so let's put the bobbin case inside the bobbin, and put the bobbin inside the bobbin case, okay? And we're going to make sure that we pull it and that it's turning the right direction. So if it's turning counterclockwise, it's the wrong direction. So mine is, and I always have to take it out and redo it, but it's a good chance for me to, and make sure it's turning clockwise, okay? And if you'll just pull on this thread, and then also you want to lay it in your hand, okay? This is really important. You'll learn tension. And if you're pulling on it and it comes up, stands up in your hand, and you feel a slight little tug, it's just right, okay? Just kind of like a little yo-yo. And some of the machines, you'll learn what your machine really likes, okay? You'll learn that, hey, my machine likes it a little tighter, or my machine likes it a little looser. You get to know your machine. There's kind of that, I feel like there's kind of that breaking in period for you and your machine to get to know each other. And I don't want it to take years for you to break in and get to know your machine. We want it to take just a matter of minutes for you to get to know and love your machine, okay? Okay, so yes, Sandy, I will show you how to wind a bobbin next time. I'm sorry I didn't. You know, we're moving around here and it is so hard to find the little things that you need. We have another building that we're going to build out and make our main building, and we have moved all of our shipping department and our sewing lab over there, and it was so hard for me to find little things. I couldn't even find an empty bobbin. So I will show you how to do that, and we'll go over that next time, I promise. So stay tuned for winding the bobbin. In fact, I'll even invite Cute Cody in here to talk about some tips and tricks about winding the bobbin, because we wanted to cover that as well. So join me for that next time, and I promise we'll do that. Amanda, make sure that I cover that. So when you're putting the bobbin in, okay, let me go through that again, okay, so that you can see what I'm doing, okay? You don't want to hold on the arm, okay? So I'll hold my bobbin in these two fingers to put it in. And then I'll turn it around. I like to go up under the bar here, because if I'm going down in, the bobbin will usually, because I'm tipping it, fall out, and I don't want it to fall out. So I'm going to go underneath it so I'm on the same level, and I'm just going to push it in. And then once I've pushed it in, I feel like it's really secure in there, I'm going to hold onto the machine handle and push. When you hear that snap, it's in place and it's locked in securely, and it's not going to come out. If you're holding on the lever, it's not locked in and you're not going to hear the snap. So make sure that you listen for the snap. If you don't hear it because you're watching Netflix and it's a little too loud, turn the TV down and make sure that you take it out again and put it in and listen for the snap, okay? All right, so now that we've done all that, let's talk about checking the hopping foot height. Okay, you can't check the hopping foot height when it's over the fabric. So make sure that as you're doing this, you've pushed everything, the machine away from your quilt project, okay? And what you're gonna do, I usually don't thread the needle to check the thread height, but it's threaded and now, so we're going to. So I'm gonna put my needle in the down position, okay? Oh, man. So let's try this again, okay. All right, so let me just try changing it because this was supposed to be the needle down. So what I'm going to do to show you how that works, I'm just going to use the hand wheel, okay, right now and put it in the down position. And I want the needle to be in the furthest, as far down as it can go before it starts moving back up again. And so that's this one. So as I'm turning it, notice it's starting to come back up. I'm going to put it back down. And now I'm going to take my foot height gauge and just slide it underneath the foot. And you can see, man, it's pretty tight. I'm having a hard time getting my foot height gauge. So I need to take my 3mm Allen wrench and just kind of loosen it just a tad. Okay, just a tad. Slide it under there and then tighten it back up. Okay, so now it's at the lowest position, but I have just adjusted it so that it's going to work and sew correctly. All right? And each foot will be different, so make sure that you do this. It didn't take me that long, and even if I was changing the foot, it's not going to take you that long. Don't be afraid to use different feet. We want to enjoy the quilting experience. How boring is it to use the same regulated precise, the same pattern, the same this, the same that for every quilt? Boring, boring, boring. I want to get you outside that comfort zone and get you trying new things, learning new techniques, and enjoying quilting. So anyway, don't be afraid. Just enjoy the process. Okay, so now I'm going to bring it back up. I'm going to take it all the way back up, and it's still kind of threaded, so I'll just pull my thread. All right, let's talk about the automation really quick and making sure that we're checking our belts. So I'm going to undo this quilt right here. I'm going to try to make it so that I don't lose everything because I want you to see. All right, I'm going to just kind of clip this down. Okay, I want you to kind of see the belt and see this dust and these threads. I don't know if you can see them, but trust me, they're there. when we put our batting on and things like that, they get kind of laid over the belts, and the belts filled with these little fibers from the batting or little threads from as we're unpicking and things like that. So notice that these little items, as our motor plate is moving back and forth side to side, it's filling up with these. And so it's going to get caught up, and eventually, all right, hang on. Eventually, right now, see this little dust right here? And this was the little thread that was right there on it. That was going to get rolled up as it was moving back and forth up inside it. And Marie took one apart the other day, and it was filthy. So make sure you're cleaning not only your tracks, but your belts and anything else that you can think of. And it will just make everything last longer. Honestly, when you clean your car, do you squirt out the engine? Because it fills up with oil and stuff. Do you clean your wheels on your car? Make sure you're cleaning everything. Make sure that you're cleaning the top belt too. Make sure that before you start quilting that your belts are taut and not loose. If they're loose, it's going to be really hard for your automation to find your directions. It's that belt that it drives across, it locks in, and it kind of helps it, gives it the direction that it needs. So anyway, make sure, and this is kind of loose. See, I shouldn't be able to do that, but I'm just going to tighten it up. Okay. Another key thing, if you have the automation, I don't care whose automation you have, if it's riding on the belts, make sure that the belt is aligned across your quilt evenly, okay? So if my belt was angled and I had it up here and the other part down there, notice what's going to happen to my pattern or my design as I'm quilting, it's going to go up the quilt or down the quilt, wherever it's angled. So if you have a design and you're quilting an edge-to-edge pattern and it's kind of moving down on one side from the other side, then you need to look and measure your brackets and make sure that they are aligned evenly so that the belt is aligned and it's moving the motor, the motor plate in the machine across your quilt nice and straight and even, okay? Okay, we've covered all that. Let's jump in. I can't remember what the rest of it was, so I have to get my information. Now, I figure that the other information, I'm going to lean up against it so it doesn't all fall down. We checked the belts. The next tip I want to leave with you is measuring your quilt. I don't care if you think you can measure it on the frame. If you are that good, let me know what you do because I want to know. If you really need to measure it. Measure your borders. Measure each border if you have more than one. Measure the center section. Measure the length and the width of the quilt so that you have those measurements down. Now this isn't quite as important as it is for the automation. But say you were quilting a quilt and you wanted to make a design and you wanted to get your measurements correctly. Having those measurements before you turn your quilt or as you're quilting across your border or whatever so that you could break up the design as you're quilting, really key and very important. So just make sure that you're measuring your quilt and writing them all down. And I'm going to have a little template for you. I decided that's one of those key things that I can present to you next week and to put measurements on so that you can print these off and apply those measurements and have them right in front of you. And then attaching your quilt layers. So whether you have a hoop frame or a rolling frame, make sure that your quilt layers are square and even. It will make the project move along that much faster. But last but not least, okay, before I get to the quilt, is your take-up rail, okay? Make sure that as you're adjusting your take-up rail, that it's just at least a finger width up underneath. If I had my quilt on, it would probably be just about right. So if you have a quilt and you're quilting on it, and you're free motion or even the automation, and there's a lot of bounce on that quilt, 10 to 1, that your take-up rail is too high up off of the plate of the sewing machine. So if you see that you have a lot of bounce as that sewing machine was going across it, make sure you're checking the height of this take-up rail. And as this fills up, you're going to have to adjust. And don't adjust one side, okay? Again, if you adjust one side as it's moving down, it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter and mess up your design. Make sure you're adjusting it up off of the plate of the sewing machine according to how many rolls you are, and use that finger. Just that tip of the finger is all you need. Just up underneath, and if it's just barely hitting, just right, okay? And just use that as a rule of thumb. Every time you roll, while you're back here rolling it up, make sure you're taking your finger and doing it. And then if you have to adjust it, make sure you move the machine in the middle and on both sides. And the longer the quilt, just make sure you move it down the quilt and make sure the adjustments are correct. Okay, those are my quilting tips. I figure the next step is just as important as these steps that I've shown you today. And that is, what do I quilt on my quilt and how do I quilt it? And so we're going to get into that, and you're going to join me on my journey. Let me show you the cute little quilt that we're going to do. And I will have the pattern ready for you. So if you want to join me, you don't have a project and you're looking for one, this is a fun, easy little project to use. And it's the 16, I always make a quilt for each new machine that we introduce. And this is the 16. So see that fun little quilt? And there's different variations of it that I have. So you don't have to use this variation. You can use one of the others or come up with your own. But I will have the pattern ready for you, and I will show you next time real quickly, because I'm not going to show you how to piece it all. I'm just going to show you my little tips for sewing curves. Because I feel like, yeah, you could learn something from me on that one, because I've done a lot of them. And then you can join me on how I'm going to quilt this and the process that I have decided what design I'm going to use, and then we're going to quilt it from beginning to end, and that's the border and everything. And I want you to enjoy quilting as much as I do, but I get a little anxious every quilt I do, and so this is going to help me as much as it's going to help you. And you guys inspire me. You send me these wonderful emails of all the things that you're working on. You just make me feel like a lazy bum. But anyway, I so appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to just continuing this relationship and growing as quilters, because I feel like we have so much to offer the world right now in this confused state of mind, and that we are so needed to help heal the world. One quilt at a time. That was even, my dad was a poet, and I didn't even know I had that in me. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next week, and I look forward to just continuing on. So take care and goodbye.